It is 12 o'clock, so let's get kicked off. My name is Paul Phillips. Today we're going to be talking about, you're joining one of our Lunch and Learn workshops. Today we're going to be talking about practical tips for Novacura Flow developers. Caveat to this presentation is that it is meant for those who develop on Flow. So I think as you guys go through the slides here, you'll see why. We'll talk a little bit about in-depth features and functionality that we put into things like Studio and other components of our product. Today, I will be your host, Paul Phillips. I am the product owner for Novacura. I run the product management group. And you'll be joined by Andreas, who will introduce himself here very shortly. Andreas is a product owner from Novacura.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Andreas Berggren, and I work as a product owner of the Flow Studio. I've been working with IFS for a long time, both as a customer and as a consultant at Novacura. Back then, more than 20 years ago, we were one of the first customers of the service management solution. So service management has been my main focus area in IFS over the years. And for the last 10 years, I've been a Flow developer, building solutions with Flow for different purposes, just like many of you do. Today's agenda. So we are going to cover two main topics. First, we have things related to creating application, which includes a bit of Flow script, Studio improvements, grid and list improvements, Bluetooth LE, events and user step refresh, binary output, and then we have connect with the OAuth 2 authentication and connector services and the IFS OData connector. Flow script and documentation. So we have added new functionality to Flow script. First, we have the RGB function where you can specify RGB values to define colors for your styling of lists and grids. Next, we have select with or without distinct for table queries. And it uses the same syntax as SQL. Then we have URL encode and URL decode. And this can be useful for URL encoding and decoding values sent to or received from REST services. So that could be maybe you need to send a callback URL as a parameter, and you typically have to encode them for it to work properly. We have the last function, which returns the last row in a table variable. A demo of the select functionality in FlowScript. So we have two sample data sets, one with customers and one with orders. So you can use the same syntax as in SQL for just selecting all the columns from a table. So you just say select star and all the columns will be there. You can also specify individual columns to have another smaller data set. We can also use computed columns. And we can use the distinct keywords to show only unique values for a column. And this also work with multiple columns. And you can also join tables using the any function. So for example, show customers that have placed an order. So by joining the customers with the customer order tables, using the customer ID as the key. You can also use function as subqueries to show related data from another table data set, like the order amount for each customer, for example. And this functionality can be very useful for working with REST and OData services if you need to transform or join different data sets. Flow script help has also been updated to better support anyone who uses Flow script with more standardized information about the functions such as description, syntax, parameters, return values, and examples. And we have gathered all our documentation under one URL, docs.novacura.com. It consists of the regular Flow help. We have documentation of all our marketplace apps and components. We have the extensibility and integration, which includes technical documentation of everything from how to set up connectors, how to configure integrations with third-party services. And we have the Flow development guideline, containing things like naming conventions, how to structure your Flow application, and other tips and tricks. I highly recommend you to take a look at this if you haven't already. Studio improvements. So we have a new icon library with redesigned icons and a lot of new icons available for all the new clients. That includes both background, foregrounds, and combination of those. Improvements in the Studio UI. So we have improved the user information layout And we have made it easier to find the user steps you want with the icons and search capabilities. And you can now keep your code in machine steps when changing the connector. No more remembering to copy the code before changing to another connector name. We have made it a lot easier to maintain users in roles. So when you have select your role, you can immediately see which user are assigned, and you can easily just change by checking or unchecking the users. It will be applied immediately. You all know the feeling when you have developed a brand new app and want to move it to a new environment. You have to remember all the roles, connectors, and properties you have used and add them exactly like this in the environment. To make that easier, you can now export them and import them into the new other environment. So you can select or export a selection of connectors, or export all of them and then import them into another environment. So it works for connectors and roles and properties. Improving efficiency in grids and lists. You can now set the row height for your grid. So it can set small for more information dense, or large for easier to read, or the middle, the standard medium for the middle ground, or the Swedish lagom. So it will look like this, depending on this setting. For efficiency, you can now set the grid row selection to automatically continue to the next step. So you set the single auto accept selection for row selection mode. And depending on the layout, it will continue to the next user step or the next input field. And you can now define the behavior of a list selection or multi-list selection. It can be set to always be open or always be closed, or the automatic, which is the default. And in the automatic mode, it will be either open or closed, depending on the data size and the screen layout. So open always in line and closed always open in close mode. So that is old school, or the like it were from the beginning in the early Flow days. So the open then will just show the inline list right in the user tab, and the closed, then you need to tap to see the list and do the selection. For more on UX improvements, you can watch our Lunch and Learn session, how UX improvements of Flow helps to maximize user efficiency. And you can watch that on our YouTube channel. Next up, Bluetooth LE, event step, and user step refresh. Bluetooth connectivity, how it works. So the Flow app is connected to one or more Bluetooth devices. An event step connects and retrieves data from the device when it's connected. And the event step is then connected to a user step, and the user gets the device readings into a user step and can continue to save the data, like measurements, for example. And to make this work, we have a new workflow element called event step, which can be used for both Bluetooth and for timers. So timers means that it can automatically refresh at a certain interval. And you configure your connection to the device with an event step, and you set the trigger type to be Bluetooth LE, and you specify the IDs for the Bluetooth device. And the event steps then connects to a user step to show the device readings. And just a small video. So this video shows the Bluetooth communication between two phones. One of them acts as a Bluetooth peripheral and notifies the Flow app running on the other device. So in this case, we select an equipment object, and then we can set the parameter to report the measure on, for example, the temperature. And then we connect to the Bluetooth device. And the user will see the values from the device. It's notifying the Flow app of the readings. So in this sample app, you can also review previous measurements, both in values, and you can also visualize the data in a graph before you actually submit the reading. Then we have the user step refresh. So for application using the subtasks, this will be a favorite. The problem in the past was that after coming back from a subtask, the user step wasn't automatically updated, and you had to work around that by adding a manual reload button. But now we can configure the step to be automatically reloaded. And the requirement is that the data is fetched through a machine step connected with a data arrow to that user step. And the update can also be triggered manually with a pull to refresh. So configure the refresh with a checkbox for the user step. So it will be set to allow reloading. And for individual input fields, you can set the merge behavior. So that could be keep my local changes, take their changes, discard my local changes. So this setting will define what will happen if we have conflicts in the data the user has entered and the data from the machine step. So I will show a little demo of that. So we start the user step reloading, we select the work task, and then we have a manual input for the work description. So we enter information there. And then we have the status prepared, no start time, and the last updated set. And then we go into the subtask change status. And then we just change the status to started. And now the values are automatically updated without we have to do anything. And you can see, since we said in the work description that we should keep the local changes, so that is still there, the thing we typed. Next, binary output. Binary output means that we can return files from machine workflows. This can, for example, be used as a service which returns a copy of an invoice PDF. So the external system sends a request to the machine workflow. The machine workflow might take the order number as input, and the workflow queries the database for the invoice file and returns the data stream to the external system. So how do you configure a workflow for binary output? So when you create a new workflow, you set the workflow output to be binary output stream instead of the default output, which is JSON. You build your workflow for fetching the actual file, and you set the output of the workflow. There are 3 required parameters, and that is file type, file name, and data. And file type can either be the MIME type, or it can just be the file extension. And the file size limit for binary output is 4 GB files. And at the moment, we only support binary as output, meaning you can't send it as input to a workflow. And we can use tools like Postman to test out our new web service. So we specify the query parameter. So in this case, it's the document ID. And in the response, we can see that the content type is set to application PDF in this case, and we see the attached file name. And we can even preview the PDF file that we get back in the body. OAuth 2 authentication. So use OAuth 2 authentication together with the M3 REST or the generic REST connector, and you will get an external login pop-up when connecting to systems using OAuth 2. So the login screen will be triggered automatically when accessing systems such as starting a workflow or reloading an inbox or downloading offline data. So you configure your REST connector. And there's a new property for OAuth 2 authentication. Yeah, and you set the URLs for the authentication and the token, and set the client ID and scope and so on. So I will now show a workflow using the Microsoft Graph API for reading files from Microsoft Teams. And this is the same API for OneDrive and SharePoint, so it can be used for either of them. So when we start the workflow, it will trigger the external login. And it will use the same security settings like two-factor authentication that in this case I have when logging into other Microsoft services. And the authentication will be cached, so I don't need to, we can first see the files, we can browse the folders and files and download the file, for example, preview that. And then when I exit the workflow, and if I start the workflow again, so then the authentication is cached. So you don't need to log in again if the token is still valid. The next run, I run it. So with REST and OData support, Flow can be your bridge to pretty much everything. So it can be platforms like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or Google, or customer service in Jira, Zendesk, or can be signing documents with DocuSign, or integrate with a web shop in Shopify. Next, we have connector services. So when you start moving into the cloud, there will probably be a challenge with connectivity to your legacy systems that are still in your local data center. Our solution to this is connector as a service. So that is a service that is run on your local network, your local data center network, and it will communicate with the Flow server in the cloud. So it's possible to communicate with on-prem services regardless of where the Flow server is hosted. No need to open ports on the on-prem network because this service will connect to the Flow server. And this connector service is released independently from Flow server releases, so it will continue to get new functionality all the time. IFSO OData connector. With the release of Flow 6.14, we released the first version of the IFSO data connector. And the IFSO data connector is built specifically for IFS Cloud. And it makes it possible to create workflows using OData pre-actions without even writing code. And this is the same as for the connector service. The connector can be updated independently of Novacura Flow. We have a couple of small demos of how easy it is to configure a machine step with the IFS OData connector. The first one is reading data from IFS Cloud. So in this example, we will query the part catalog for a specific part. So if we open up the get part catalog machine step, we will be able to select our cloud demo connector, and then we can just browse for the part catalog set, and we will choose the read operation in this case, since we want to read data. We add the condition, and you can choose between all of the fields in this pre-action, and you set the filter to be a variable in your workflow. And then you select which of the fields you want in this query. So you don't have to use all of them. And that's it. And now we will get the result back from a machine step reading data. And next we have a way of saving data as well. So in this machine step, we will create a material requisition header. So in this case, instead of using the read operation, we select the create, and then we get a nice list of the required parameters that needs to be set. We will map them to our variables in the workflow. And you see a list of all the optional parameters as well you can set for creating the new header. So, and when this machine step is run, it will create this new requisition header, and you will get the complete header back into the target variable, and you can use it later on in the workflow. So that was a very short introduction to the IFSO data connector, but for an in-depth description of the IFSO data connector, watch the Lunch and Learn session, the IFS Cloud and Flow OData connector on our YouTube channel. So if you go into the Novacura account on YouTube, there will be a separate playlist for all the Lunch and Learn sessions that we have had so far. Time for questions and answers, and back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Andreas. Good presentation. I appreciate it. I know we're a little bit ahead on time, so we have some time to take on most of these questions, which is good. And we'll likely give you guys back some time in your day, but please stick around. We're going to do questions and answers, and then we're going to do a quick survey. So I think I'll start from the top, Andreas. Klaus asked, is Playground available for partners / all? that playground's pretty cool, isn't it? It's nice to see an output of what you get. But from my understanding, it's not included for all yet. Typically, that's just the way that we test out our new FlowScript capabilities. Is that a correct statement, Andreas?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So it's
maybe something to consider in the future, though, is adding the playground, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice tool when you want to develop more complex scripts. So yeah, that is something we might consider. Yeah.
Very nice. Mahesh has asked, any limitations in data size or performance considerations that might be needed when doing a select option in the FlowScript? You know FlowScript a bit better than I do, I must say, Andreas. What do you think?
No, I don't think there are any specific limits to the data, but of course, if you have very large data set, you will hit some kind of performance limitations, I guess.
I think the other thing to be said is that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Andreas, but FlowScript does run on the clients, right? So it's locally cached on the clients and therefore executes on the clients, which means it doesn't go back to the server to communicate like a connector would. Therefore, the performance is typically a bit better because it's handled that way. Maybe it's a true statement. So Mahesh, if you hit some limitations, let us know. I think we're interested in that feedback for sure. If you're trying to do something on 10,000 records and you find that it takes performance down, we're interested in the feedback for sure. Mahesh, again, awesome. So any way to set the number of rows first shown in the data grid, or is it something different by default? So I think he's referring to the pagination of the data grid here. I don't know about this one, Andreas. Do you? Is there a way to set by default the all records?
No, I don't think so. There will be some kind of automatic setting for that. So if you have a lot, if you show the grid inline and you have a lot of rows, then you will see this fetch more button. So I don't think you can set that at the moment, no.
Let us take that one back to Mahesh and put some thought into it. I mean, I know we haven't presented it here, but I think in the other one regarding clients, we are in the process of releasing a new web client soon, and therefore maybe this is something we need to consider in that. So good feedback. Michael, when you do a select into a result and return the result, does the output table have to be defined first outside the FlowScript? I think I understand that. It does not, right? Yeah. So
exactly.
So your output dynamic. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the data set you create inside the Flow script will be set to the output target variable you set top right. So it doesn't have to be in use before the FlowScript step. But you can, of course, use your data set from the workflow. So for example, I just manually created the order and the customers list, but that could typically come from some kind of query before this FlowScript.
Another one from Damian. Is it possible to remove devices from the device list under environment? We have a lot of devices and that are not used anymore. So I don't think this is possible today without going to the underlying database, Damian, which we wouldn't suggest. So you can block devices, which is a good way to make sure that they don't come back on the server if you're using device approval. But today there's no way to clear that list, sir. And I am looking through, the chat real quick, Andreas, another one. So the REST connector used to support OAuth 2. What's different about it now, Andreas?
So that is all the automatic external logins, and you get the callback back to the Flow client. So you can, Go ahead.
I think it's a good statement. I think we used to support OAuth too. We used to support things like client secret credentials, password credentials, things that could be stored inside of the connector, but we didn't actually handle what they call authorization code flow, which is the ability to sort of communicate with the third-party system, authenticate against that as someone, and only bring back the data based on that someone. So in the Microsoft case you gave, right, you were authenticating against Andreas yourself to only see your emails. In the world of client credentials, that wouldn't really be the case. You would almost have open access to mostly all email. So I think this adds a lot of flexibility and capabilities to our offering. So another question, is there anywhere we can see the examples of the BLE connectivity, Andreas? How do I use, it sounds like they're trying to use the function here.
So, if you, can you say that again?
Yeah.
Please.
So is there any place where I can find an example of the BLE connectivity?
Yeah, I think it should be part of the documentation we have for the marketplace.
Yeah, there is some documentation on our marketplace. So if you guys go to the market, if you guys go to docs.novacura.com and dig into the marketplace documentation for extensibility, you'll be able to see not only a quick guide tutorial on BLE, which I think is important to read up on and make sure you have a better understanding of Bluetooth Low Energy and how it can be used. It also does talk through an example of how to connect them. And we do offer an app on the marketplace to download to be able to see how to exactly configure and connect your event steps, but strongly suggest looking at the documentation. Another question, do you have any ability on, do you have any plans on providing the ability to define flow script function in more global manner? Right now, the functions do have to be defined within a new script step, which defeats the purpose a bit. That's interesting. So I think you're referring to being able to do flow script in something like a global property almost, in essence, instead of in the individual flow. So Frederick, I don't think we support this today. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andreas. And we do have something in the slides here, or in the Menti that we're about to do, which is a quick survey afterwards. One of which question is, what feature would you like to see in the next release of Flow? Maybe this is a good one to put into that. Yeah.
So for this script question there, we don't have that capability at the moment, but the functions is I think mainly used if you have iterations. So if you loop over a data set and you want to do something with all rows, for example, and you have that functionality can be in a separate function then.
And Klaus asks, or maybe not asks, data grid, if you handle the pagination before in SQL and you want full control using buttons and Flow, are there any plans to make it possible to disable the grid pagination buttons? I don't know if I fully understand that one, Klaus, and but maybe you could send us something afterwards and tell us an example. Sounds like you're using pagination in SQL, but want to do something on the client to support that. So let us take that one back. Maybe I need to read through it a few times to better understand it, or you could add a little bit of extra context to it. Oh, getting a lot. Sorry, Andreas, I got more for us. Okay, so the next one. Is there any community group for Novacura where we can ask if we have questions related to flows and portals? Oh, that's a great question. So we have just released our new community, which we've taken down the old community. I believe it's maybe forums.novacura.com. I strongly suggest everyone goes to right now in their URL, forum.novacura.com, and signs up for our new community. It is a great way to get people like Andreas and I into the conversations that you're wondering about Flow, not just us, but even other customers. So our customer success group is actually on board with reviewing what's been posted here. So are we. We often find our experts answer questions, but even customers are answering other customers' questions on how to use Flow. A great way to get more involved and see what other customers are doing as well. Again, you'll go here and you'll have to register for an account, but it is our new community. I see a comment here from Klaus. Thank you, Klaus. Okay, I actually think that is it. Is there any other questions from anyone? If so, put it into the Q&A box. Just a few other comments, Mahesh. The default pagination in data grid is not convenient when we know the row size is certain in certain flows. Would like to have to control how many rows are shown to us. Mahesh, it's good feedback. So again, I stick around for the Menti here, which is the survey. Please put that one into the survey as a feature request. It would be very helpful. And Michael, I see your comment here. Can we do more of these? I think we should. It's a great comment. We'd like to get more information out to you guys on how we're progressing the product. So probably expect something in the future. Okay, so I will turn it over. I'm going to take over presentation, Andreas, and I just want to show everyone the Menti. Okay, so if everyone would please go to www.menti.com. I'll leave this screen up for a bit. On this screen, you should be asked to enter a code. That code here is 40724687. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to go through this. It is a survey, not only on our product, but how we did today in today's presentation. So I ask that you guys take time to answer these questions. I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit here, and then I'm going to flip over to the next slide. So again, if you're just joining now, or if you've missed what I just said, please go to www.menti.com and enter this code 40724687. And you can go ahead. There will be a button prompt there. It'll say something like instructions and next. If you click the next button, you should be able to start the survey and answer the questions. I'm going to leave the screen up for 1 minute, and then I'm going to go to the next slide. While I leave this up, Andreas, there is one more question. Is it possible to define another set in the icon library? So it's a great question, Callistus. We actually did an update of our framework in this last update of the icon library, which means it is easier to add to the icon library than it was in the past. If you have suggestions, we strongly suggest that you get those to us. It doesn't mean that we'll put them in immediately, but we will take them into consideration in the next coming updates. You could do that if you have Jira or JSM, whichever system you're on. You can feel free to put a case in, and we'll put that into the backlog, sir. Would love to see a couple of icons that you're interested in.
Yeah, and I'll also use the forum, and there I think you can vote for each other's ideas as well.
So I just went ahead in the chat also and put this menti.com, and I also put the code here so that we can move forward. All right, so what new features are you most interested in using immediately that we presented today? Looks like the heavy hitter is the grid and list improvements. Well, maybe we should have segregated this question. Very curious how our customers are using grid versus list and when to use others. I find that list does really well in mobile applications, where grid does really well on web applications. So it's interesting to see the feedback. I guess the one running right behind that is new flow script. These are always, customers love these, don't they? Like whenever we add new flow scripts, they always seem to go over well.
Yeah,
My favorite's
do more.
URL decode and encode for sure. You know, when we get into the OData context, they become pretty impressive.
Yeah. And we also have this base 64 encoding that can also be useful for the REST web services.
I like this third place today looks to be this return files from machine workflows. It looks like it just took over second place. That's interesting. Yeah, I loved Andreas in your presentation in Postman showing the example. I think that's really tangible to see how it gets used. All right, next question. How likely are you to upgrade to 6.14 to get access to these new features? So it looks like a lot of people are already on 6.14, which is good to know. Some have some upgrades to do. It'd be interesting to see the list of customers and how big of an upgrade this is, what versions they're on versus what versions they'll go to. But yeah, looking forward to seeing more customers get on 6.14. What feature would we like to see most in future releases? Rich text editing. I love this one. This is a good feature for sure. True iterator for batch and OData connector. Yeah, I think this is a great one. Iterator and batch, I think, are two separate things, right? Iterator, in my opinion, is looping over a table. Batch is sort of a low-code way to handle batch capabilities in OData. So whoever put this one, very curious as to which one you're referring to, but I agree. It is something we have very highly prioritized in our roadmap right now. Workflow metrics for connectors. Yeah, I love this. Telemetry is a big one on our roadmap right now as well. Ability to mass publish flows when changing a fragment used ubiquitously. Ability for user to pin flows to menu. I love that. Users on handheld want a few most used flows easily available. I agree, like some configurability in the clients to allow users to dictate that versus the flow developers makes really good sense, whoever put this one here. Also, the mass publish of flows. Today, if you don't know this, you can right mouse button a structure to the left side and publish many flows at once in a folder. So if you have a folder that is 10 workflows, if you publish the folder, it will publish all 10 workflows. Not sure if you know that. And I think we've added some stuff. It might have been in 6.13, Andreas, where we allow users to actually update a fragment across many of those workflows. So if you haven't seen that, strongly suggest taking a look at the documentation. I think that was one of the nicest features we added in 6.13.
Yeah,
maybe it was 6.13. It's maybe 6.12. Improvement in data grid and pagination functionality. Yep, more flexible changes. I would love to hear from who put this one in a little bit more detail wrapped around this. What type of changes? Because changes in the user steps probably is what I'm taking it as, but I'm curious. New web client. So yeah, whoever put this one in will be happy in the near future for sure. Possibility to export flow, info, and set attributes to a text file to aid documentation. Set attributes in a text file to aid documentation. All right, we take that one. I think that's an interesting one we haven't talked about. Connector switcher based on defined condition possibility. Yeah, that's interesting. We've heard this one before, actually. So being able to change the connector dynamically in a flow based on certain parameters. We talked about this actually in regards to needing to talk to like TCP IP type ports, Andreas, a while back. Okay, so I see some really good stuff here. We'll keep going through this afterwards. I appreciate the feedback. If you haven't answered, feel free to put some time into answering this. Why would you recommend Flow to others? New icons look. This one must be my favorite out of all of them, Andreas. Best product ever. The person earns a gold star for the day. Easy programming. That's a good one. quick ability to develop screens. You know, I think this is a good one. I like this. I actually think we are very quick, probably one of the quickest out there to develop these screens without a difficult UI design, in my opinion. I agree with that. Good that changes with IFS Cloud handled by new connectors. Yes, I agree. The OData connector will be probably one of our most used connectors in the near future. Very nice. Like the idea of global flow script and super easy to create an app. So all really good feedback, and I appreciate it. If there's any other comments, feel free to put them in here. We will do our best to take them into consideration. And I think if that's all, we will give you guys back a couple minutes in your day. So I just want to say thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be able to run another one of these pretty near future. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.